Hello, I'm Danny Robbins of Uncanny, and I am this week's guest on MetaPod.
You're listening to MetaPod, where we unpack the web's most interesting podcasts and the stories behind them. Hosted by Wendy Morrill and Kevin May.
Now, if we believed in spooky things, Wendy, we'd be marvelling or unsettled by the uncanny timing of our episode this week, huh? Oh, and by the way, hello to you and greetings to you, dear listeners.
I see what you did there, Kev, and hello to you too. And the rest of you too. That was a lot of twos. I think there's even more twos coming, right?
Right. Okay, our guest this week, Danny Robbins, won Best New Play for his show 222, A Ghost Story at the What's On Stage Awards. That was just last night.
Toot the horns for Team 222. Also, 2 stars of its first run in London's West End, Lily Allen and Jake Wood. They won awards as well, so congratulations to them.
Indeed, it's a terrific play and it's returning for a third run in London in a few months' time. Wendy and I actually saw this last year and we thoroughly recommend it if we haven't done a few times already.
Yes, we did, and yes, we do. But back to MetaPod for now, as we bring the UK's most famous shed-based broadcaster to our own airwaves for a second interview, this time to talk about his hit podcast, Uncanny. Now, Kev, let me ask you this. Which of the 2 podcasts, the Battersea Poltergeist or Uncanny, would you deem the scariest?
Easy answer. It's definitely Uncanny for me. I think mostly because of some of the stories over its 15 episodes are truly both terrifying and, to use a term we've heard elsewhere on MetaPod, unexplainable. What about you, Wendy?
I'd say the scariest story is the Battersea Poltergeist, and not just to be contradictory, but mostly just for the sheer amount of time that the Hitchings family lived with and suffered from Donald the Poltergeist. That's not to say that the stories in the Uncanny series are light listening. A few are disturbingly bizarre, but believable, even though, as you said, they are unexplainable.
Yeah, and as you hear us getting into Danny, he's turned into this minor celebrity, not least because he's turned up at some of his locations from the show and has bumped into some of his or the show's fans. So anyway, Danny is back for this episode of MetaPod, a third returnee guest. It's a great interview with lots of chat about some of the scary tales from his show and some deep analysis, we hope, of what it all means.
Okay, here we go. Start the tape.
Danny Robbins, welcome back. You're here to talk to us again at MetaPod about Uncanny. So you joined us about a year ago to talk about the Battersea Poltergeist. That particular season had just ended, and Uncanny, that season has just ended as well. So we're delighted to have you back again. Thank you. Welcome, Danny.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's been a crazy year, and it's kind of nice to bookend it with a chat with you guys.
It has been a crazy year. I mean, when we spoke to you, as you said, we were talking about the Battersea Poltergeist. We're not stalking you, but we did come and see your play in London. 222, A Ghost Story, which was also terrific. And you've produced Uncanny, which is the podcast we're going to be talking about today. So you have been pretty busy. But I think what I'm quite curious about, to kick us off if we can, Danny, is that you had an opinion on ghosts and whether you believed or not when we spoke to you before. And I wonder, through the research and the production and the hosting of Uncanny, whether your opinion has changed about the phenomena that you seem to be very interested in various forms of your work.
It's a really good question. And I sort of feel like when people ask me about this subject, it's not just do ghosts exist, it's do you believe in ghosts yourself? And they kind of look to me and they want some sort of answer, some kind of definite answer. And they feel like if I'm convinced, if I've been convinced, then they can be too, I guess, because I've been soaking up so much of this. You know, and then they sort of feel like, you know, if Robbins can sift through all his evidence, if he's convinced, then we can go with it. But I mean,
does it make you like a David Attenborough character because people believe him about climate change?
Well, now, right? I mean, someone did describe me as the David Attenborough of creepy, which I liked a lot. I've also had the Brian Cox of ghosts, but I'll take them all. But I mean, the truth is that no, I don't have an answer, and I also feel that is important in itself. And I feel like one of the pleasures of this subject is that we don't have answers, and you've got this wonderful mystery that we're all exploring. And I love the journey that we're going on. I love the adventure. That is it Hamlet, where they talk about that kind of uncharted territory. I love the idea that there isn't answers. And the reason that we're still talking about cases like the Enfield haunting or Battersea Poltergeist is because they are robust enough to deflect easy answers from skeptics. And so, if I had answers, I wouldn't be making these podcasts. It's the searching for the questions that's important. And if I could just tell you, that this ghost story, it's not a ghost, or even maybe if I could tell you it is a ghost, I mean, you wouldn't be interested. What's the point in listening if I can give you that easy answer? And nobody would go back and want to explore Battersea Poltergeist more or explore any of these stories more if I could give you a definitive answer. I am a skeptic who wants to believe. I really, really, really want to believe. And I think there are deep-seated reasons for that I maybe got into on the last podcast, but I was brought up in an atheist household. I was kind of, I lived a childhood devoid of belief and was intrigued by the possibility of it. And I also had this experience in my early 20s where I call it my own near-death experience, even though I wasn't actually near-death, but it was this panic attack where I thought I was going to die. And that made me fascinated by death and not want death to be the end. So I think those things are very personal things for me that drive me on. But in terms of your question about has it changed my opinion, I've been presented with so many cases making Uncanny that are really, really intriguing, really inexplicable, really frightening, where I can see tangibly the imprint of what happened on this person. I can see that it was life-changing. I can see that they crossed over a threshold, that they couldn't go back. They couldn't be the person they were before. That's really powerful. And my pulse races every time someone sends me a story where they say, I don't believe in ghosts, but I saw a ghost, and those words excite me. And that's what makes me get up in the morning. And so I haven't changed my opinion, but maybe I've slid in the last few years from when I made Haunted, my first series, to now, maybe slid across the spectrum a little bit from being more kind of skeptic to kind of more open to belief. But I think it's really crucial to what I make that I am neither, that I sit in the middle and that I don't have too much skin in either game. I think, if I had seen something myself, I don't think I would be able to do this. I don't think I would be able to kind of deliver the impartiality that I feel is important, and to embrace both camps and keep both camps happy. I love the fact that believers listen to the show and think it's a show for believers, and that skeptics listen and think it's a show for skeptics. And there's a big group of people in the middle, like me, who aren't sure. And I love that all those people feel included and feel happy within, the kind of the Uncanny community.
It's a very BBC answer, if I may say so.
I know, sorry, it's a coward's answer. And, you can absolutely knock me for it, but it's a position based on just where I am at in life. I can't give you definite answers. And again, I feel like if I could, it would be disappointing. And somebody would be disappointed if I told you that I believed one way or another, and it's the truth that I don't.
I have a much more practical question, Danny. How are you keeping up? I mean, this seems to be snowballing. You're the hardest working man in social media as far as I can tell, and it's just amazing. I mean, how are you keeping up? Are the stories easier to come by now? Is that becoming a problem, or is it a good thing? I mean, you've been doing this for a while now.
Yeah, if I was to tell you that I don't sleep a lot, you might think it was to do with the ghost stories, but it's actually just trying to keep up with all my work deadlines. The other day I did a 19-hour day where I got up at 9 o'clock in the morning, started work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then finished work at 4 o'clock in the morning. That was kind of the nadir recently of trying to keep up with things. It's all work I really enjoy. So, working hard on it is fun, but clearly, there have been moments recently where I've not seen my family enough, and that's not so good. But in terms of the stories, that's a really good question about the stories coming in. I think, I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of stories coming to me, and that's been beautiful and moving and exciting. And, they came to me from Haunted, more came from Battersea Poltergeist, and even more come through Uncanny now. And what I'm doing, my objective for the next series is to find a greater diversity of stories, I think, and to really branch out, find all sorts of stories, people from different age groups, different backgrounds, different, countries, different, all sorts, and different types of stories. It was really interesting. I felt that we had, one about premonitions, one about guardian angels, and the UFO stories as well, which was a a different avenue for me, but one that really kind of seemed to connect with people. So I'm in a lovely position. I've got this treasure trove of stories coming in and lots to dive into, but at the same time, I'm really keen for more as well. I'm always welcoming more, because you never know when you're going to get that absolute piece of gold story that is, just the kind of, the ones like 611. I mean, I had no idea that Room 611 would become what it was. For people who haven't heard the show, that was the first episode we did, and it ended up being 3 episodes telling the story of this Belfast student hall of residence that really strange things happened in over many years to many people.
The bloody hell Ken thing has just taken on a life of its own as well, isn't it? I mean, T-shirts. I mean, how do you merchandise the hell out of bloody hell Ken?
I know. I mean, it's strange. I mean, it was this line. Ken had just said something really scary. I mean, Ken was this amazing character who felt like a walking manifesto for the series, that he was this eminent scientist who'd seen a ghost, who believed he'd seen a ghost, a really terrifying ghost, and was struggling to reconcile it, and so he was great. And I uttered the words bloody hell Ken in response to something scary he said. I remember sitting in the edit and thinking, I should probably cut that, we're tight for time, I'm gonna, we don't need to hear that, do we? And then I left it in, and then lo and behold, it becomes this internet meme, and it becomes, I think, this catchphrase that kind of embodies a lot of things, this mixture of amazement and fear and solidarity and, support for people like Ken, and just, it becomes this great kind of utterance of both belief and disbelief. Now we've done T-shirts and tote bags and mugs. So yeah, I mean, it's that was due to popular demand. I mean, that was like enough people were sort of saying to me, like, will you do it? But eventually I bowed and were like, oh, well, all right, if you want it, I'll do it. And we've sold quite a few.
Are you getting people yelling it at you in the street yet? I mean, that's the sure sign that it's stuck when that happens, right?
I haven't had that yet, but I did have a lovely moment where I went to Rottingdean, the scene of one of our other stories. Episode 13 was set in this amazing old kind of housing estate called Tudor Close in Rottingdean. And I was in Brighton for a weekend away with my wife the other day, and we thought, well, we'll pop over to Rottingdean and have a look at this place. And lo and behold, I bumped into some Uncanny fans who were walking through the graveyard by the house at the same moment as me. So I was kind of caught out on this kind of little fan pilgrimage for my own show, Danny, and I was like, oh, hello, hi there. And I sort of learned through social media that many, many people have been going there, kind of taking pictures. I suspect the owners are probably quite annoyed with me, but that was nice, and it's lovely to think that people are interested enough in the stories that they want to go to the locations and they want to, deep dive into it.
I had a serious question which was related to Wendy's. I mean, you're getting this deluge of cases that people are emailing you about. What's your filter from this is someone who's just a little bit unhinged and is possibly making this up to, okay, I need to put this in the trademarks, investigate a little bit more?
Really hard to say. I mean, I don't think I am qualified to be the person to judge if somebody is mentally unwell when they're sending the stories, but clearly certain stories ring certain alarm bells, and those are ones that you might, sort of steer the person towards other streams, other places that might be able to help them better, I don't know. I have certain sort of filters that I put on myself. I sort of feel like I'm more interested in stories where somebody went from a point of view of not believing in ghosts to suddenly having this moment. That feels more dramatic to me, more compelling. And I guess, it feels very real and very believable, you feel like if that can happen to that person, then it can happen to any of us. If you're the most robustly skeptic person and then you see a ghost, and that's incredible drama. That's a great starting point for a story. So, stories that begin with, I've seen loads and loads and loads of ghosts throughout my whole life, and then this is one of my ghost stories, probably interest me less. But, that said, in Haunted, we told a really interesting story about a woman who'd spent her life seeing ghosts, and that was really, really compelling in itself. So I don't feel like there are any sort of hard and fast set rules, but certainly my pulse races and I get very excited when I see one that comes in from a hardened skeptic. And then I don't know, beyond that, you get a feel for certain stories. I am constantly amazed by the eloquence of the people who write to me. And I know there's been a very, very small minority of people on Uncanny who've suggested that, are these actors, are these people you found that they're making up? How come these people can speak that eloquently? And I think that the eloquence has its roots in the fear. I think if you are that frightened and this thing is ingrained in your memory that much, you remember it so vividly and with such kind of dramatic clarity that you are able to describe it brilliantly and in pinpoint precision. And also there's a need, if you've been that scared, there is a need to convey that fear to the person that you're talking to. Because, that's how ghost stories work. It's about somebody conveying the fear they felt to us and trying to invoke that fear in us so that we will believe them. And so I think, that's where the eloquence comes from. But I'm struck by the fact that people write me these stories and they feel like, Stephen King novels. They feel like M.R. James stories. They're incredible. They have this perfect free act structure, this kind of amazing narrative to it. And, we as human beings think in narratives. We try and make sense of chaos, like chaotic things happen to us, or, there are chaotic things in the world and we impose our human order on it. We see, the plow, the Big Dipper instead of a bunch of stars, those kind of moments, where we are imposing our human vision on the world and building stories and patterns. Clearly as human beings we have these experiences and then we impose a narrative on it. So there's some degree storytelling that comes into, you've had an experience, you try and make sense of it, you think, oh well, that must be linked to that thing I did, or maybe it's linked to the person who lived in the house before, and you start to build a narrative. And some people are, I guess, better at that and more creative at that than others, trying to make sense of their story through the storytelling. Stories that present themselves with an incredible narrative that feels like it jumps out like a real life horror film are clearly, the ones that I absolutely get sweaty palms and excited over.
In the Uncanny series, I think what's interesting compared to, say, the Battersea Poltergeist is these are all different people, they're all different stories, different phenomena, yet you see these similar elements. So particularly in the language that people use to describe their experiences, like I felt a presence, it was blacker than black. These are fairly recurring ways to describe something. Have you come across a story that seems beyond describing with language?
That's a really interesting question. You're right that we kind of leap at certain terms. And, the word that Ken in the Room 611 story chose was evil. He honed in on this sensation that he'd felt. There is a moment where a lot of people struggle to describe the actual thing they saw. Tracy Ann Oberman, the actress who came into the last episode we did, the final episode, she was struggling to describe this experience she'd had in Lincoln Cathedral, and she sort of was using words like entity and this big black entity. But when I probed her on it, did it have a face? What would it look like? How tall it was? It was quite hard for her to actually find these, tangible, clear descriptions. And it reminded me a little bit of the one and only time in my life, fingers crossed and touch wood, that I have been mugged. And I was walking under a railway bridge in London, in Kentish Town in London, and these 3 teenagers set on me, and instantly, within like a second of stepping up to me, they were punching me in the head, trying to steal my phone. And luckily, some bloke scared them off in his van. They went running off. They didn't get anything. But afterwards, I had to deal with the police, and the police were asking me what they looked like. And I had no idea what they looked like at all. Absolutely no idea. These people had been right in my face, punching me in the head. No idea. They were showing me all these pictures of identity parade kind of stuff. And I was like, I can't help you. I have no idea what these people look like. And I sort of feel like in these moments of intense, dramatic trauma, it's very hard to process stuff. It's very hard to take things in and accurately describe stuff. And so you do find yourself reaching for these phrases again and again, like evil or black or dark entity, this kind of black shadow, again and again, these kind of shadow figures come up in these stories, or just that sense of presence. We use the sort of stock vocabulary of things that we've heard before as ways of trying to make sense of, something that is almost impossible to make sense of, something that is sensory. In terms of things that have left people actually speechless, there's that, I think it's an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Unnameable, where, somebody is asked to describe the horrific thing that he saw, and he goes, it was unnameable, and I feel there are certain stories we've done where people kind of creep close to that thing. I sort of felt like Ken's was a little bit like that. And there was a story in Haunted. It's set in South Africa, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't heard it, but the guy sees something that is just bizarre and terrifying, that seems to kind of come from some sort of collective guilt about the situation in South Africa. But it's almost like he knows it's a dream, and yet the fear he feels is so real that he cannot believe it's a dream. And he's stuck in this kind of no man's land between things. He's this skeptic who kind of doesn't believe in ghosts and kind of thinks this can't be a ghost. And yet the fear is so profound that he can never get over this moment. So that to me feels like that gets into the kind of territory you're talking about a sort of an experience that breeds a sort of inarticulateness in an articulate person. They cannot possibly process this. They can never quite make sense of it.
I mean, this is maybe a simpler question, but how do people know that a presence or a ghost has a gender? I mean, you hear people say it was a woman or it was a man, or is there anything around that maybe you don't include in the stories?
It's something that we've talked about a lot. I mean, we touched on it a little bit in episode 5, the Brooklyn Poltergeist, and talking about how Charlie Howard, the model who was telling that story, how she was exposed to a lot of very bad male behavior in her work as a model. And she was also living with this kind of very aggressive man, her flatmate. And we sort of chatted with her and chatted with Evelyn Hollow and Deborah Hyde, our experts, about, to what degree do you impose maleness on this presence in the house because you identify an aggressive, threatening presence with the males in your life, and I think that's interesting. And certainly within the paranormal, we seem to have a recurring narrative of female victims and male aggressors. The poltergeist stories are dominated by these ideas of male poltergeists, given male names often, like Donald in Battersea Poltergeist, as Fred in the Black Monk of Pontefract, and I think Bill in the Enfield Poltergeist. They're assigned male names, and they're kind of young women who are frightened, young girls who are frightened by these things, and then a sort of kindly male comes into their lives as the possible source of hope or comfort. In the Enfield case, it's Maurice Grosse, and Guy Playfair, and in Battersea, it's Harold Chibbett. You see that what Deborah Hyde, the skeptic, referred to as an uncle figure. This kind of safe male who comes in to and you can sort of see that as a rite of passage with different aspects of masculinity presented to the adolescent person passing through, coming of age. So, I mean, it's a really interesting debate. And for some reason, there are far fewer, female aggressive spirits than male, it seems, in the kind of, in the stories and the kind of folklore of it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an absolutely intriguing territory. And clearly, that's a human imposition. I mean, if you believe in ghosts and you believe that they are some sort of life force, some sort of energy kind of thing, then yes, you can believe that specifically a man or a woman has come back as a ghost. But if you're kind of going down that route of, poltergeist being an energy, the theories of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, the idea that energy kind of either comes out of the person or that somehow it is just this energy that exists, and then you assign it a gender, then clearly there is a kind of, in assigning a gender, there is an agenda. You are bringing your own experiences of, for instance, men to this haunting.
It's interesting because there have been a couple of your interviewees or the cases that have kind of come through during, at least from a listener's perspective, during the course of the show. And I wonder what it is. Maybe it's the things that you've referenced there that's driven them to suddenly say, you said some people have never ever spoken to anybody about it. I'm the first person, and that's very honourable that I'm in that position. But it's interesting that it's taken a show, a podcast that talks about the subject, as you say, in a respectful and sometimes scientific way and in a fairly light way, for them to come forward, and because they know that they may get on the air, as it were. That's quite a leap in some of these people's minds, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I never get a sense for people that they're doing it for the attention or wanting to get on air. And I mean, and certainly in Ken's case, I mean, he said to me when he sent me the story that he never expected anything to happen with it. He just wanted to put it down on record. He just wanted it to not be forgotten. And here was this bloke who'd made a show about the Battersea Poltergeist, and he thought maybe I was a good person to tell it to. I think.
Let me interrupt you there. What does Belfast University think?
Well, they've actually really embraced it and kind of run with it. I mean, I think, the current day students have been fascinated by it. The people within the university seem to be fascinated by it. I mean, it's a slice of history. And I think, also like so much debate and talk about Belfast has been dominated by the Troubles. So I think it's quite nice for them to have a story which is not about that, and about a sort of, a moment in Belfast history that is just kind of very different to what is often presented. Yeah, I mean, I think it would ring alarm bells to me if someone was doing it for the attention and wanting to just get on the podcast.
Let me ask you, Danny. I mean, the Belfast one is a good example, but we know that particular halls of residence, that block has since been demolished and it has new facilities on it. But some of the other places that you reference in the show still exist. I would imagine some are fairly, especially Learbuilt in Scotland, in the Highlands. That's a very obvious place for people to go. How have you dealt with the locations and perhaps identifying them, yes or no? Because you said you turned up in Rottingdean and there was some Uncanny fans there, which is mildly amusing, I suppose. But some of the other ones, how have you dealt with that?
I mean, it's a good question and a really important one. And certainly kind of ethically, we don't give out the address of places where people are still living. I mean, like we didn't say the number of Tudor Close where Grant lived. I mean, Tudor Close is a sort of historic landmark, and you couldn't really tell that story without talking about it. And it's famous as being the site of an old hotel, and it was where Cluedo the game was invented. So there's many things that make that a historic landmark. And I feel it's okay to talk about it. Louis Belt is a ruined cottage. I feel like that's okay to talk about it. Yep. I mean, in the Hannah Bett story, we did not give out the address. We didn't give out the specific location. That's really important because there's another family living there at the moment. And, the question, so many people ask me, like, have you been there to the location now? Can we go and investigate? Have you asked the current residents if they've experienced anything? My answer to all of that is no, because to turn up on someone's doorstep and say, do you see ghosts? Is your house haunted? If that person's just bought their house and then suddenly you plant that idea in their head, that's a horrible thing to do. But also, I'm interested in people more than places, and I think that's a key difference for me between what I do and a lot of paranormal shows. A lot of the TV paranormal shows, which are kind of dominated by the kind of the night vision and the running around and screaming, which are fun and exciting in their own right. But they're very much, you go to a haunted pub or you go to a haunted castle and you spend the night there and you see what happens, And I feel like, I'm taking the starting point of a person, an experience that happened to a person and their story. And I don't think if I went to Louis Belt, I would have the same experience that Phil did when he went there. And if that block in Belfast still existed, I don't think I would spend the night in Ken's bedroom and see that figure. I think one of the fans of the show said this on Twitter the other day, but they were saying about how a poltergeist is like a recipe and it needs the right ingredients. You need the right person, the right place, the right time, the right factors, all that sort of thing. This is why some other paranormal shows get into kind of cheating, because if you go to the haunted castle and you've got to make an hour of television and nothing's happening, you kind of have to make stuff up. You have to get your psychic to come in and channel the ghost of a dead peasant boy or like whatever. I think that's just I'm not interested in doing that. And if we get to do Uncanny on television, which I would love to do at some point, then yes, I would go to Louis Belt. And I think, you could do loads of atmospheric stuff being in that location. And it's really interesting to see the location, fascinating to see the thing that made Phil have this experience. I don't think that if loads and loads of listeners went there, that they would all have that experience.
Related to that, and it was just a flippant question I was going to ask, would you do a sleepover at Louis Belt?
I would, I absolutely would. Yeah. And
you're not put off by what you've heard about it. You don't, in other words, you don't seem scared by some of the things that you've heard about any of the locations. You said you would sleep in 611, but you don't think you would see anything, but you would sleep there.
It's interesting. I think I would be excited going there. I mean, I was excited going to 30 East Drive when we did it for Battersea Poltergeist. I had a real rush of adrenaline and I was willing it to happen. I was going like, please let it happen, and let me see something fly across the room. Desperately wanted it, and I'm sure I'd be like that in Louis Belt and Allenbrook Hall and all these places. I'm sure I would have that excitement. I think it is a combination of factors, and I think it's certain people have certain moments in their life where they are maybe more open to these things, and a certain location kind of fits that. And it might happen to me, but I think if you go into things thinking that you're going to go to this place and you're going to have experiences, that's where you get into kind of something just becoming like a kind of paranormal tourist spot. I mean, like East Drive has become that, like people go there, they pay their money, they spend the night there, and if something doesn't happen to you, then you feel disappointed. It feels anticlimactic.
Is there a phenomena that you would really or most like to experience? Maybe something to help you with your social media activities? Time lapse?
Time lapse would be useful. I mean, I would love to see an object move. I'd love to see an object fly across the room. I think that is, there's a reason why poltergeists hold such a fascination for us. It's the most tangible of ghosts. When I hear people describe this stuff, and these are people who I believe utterly, I don't think they're making it up, and the circumstances they were in, for me, make it feel quite hard that they were mistaken. When people describe seeing an object fly across the room in front of them, that's as powerful as it gets for me. So I would love to see that. I think over and above seeing an apparition, the power of seeing a real object do something impossible, move across a room, would be really powerful. And, like one new witness we had for the Battersea Poltergeist towards the end of the series, where she's really elderly now, she's in her 80s, and described seeing some scissors fly across the room in the alterations room of Selfridges, where Shirley, the person at the heart of the Battersea Poltergeist case, was working. I mean, that just blew me away. That was one of the most amazing bits of testimony in the whole series, I thought. I mean, just imagine how you would feel if you saw an object pick up off your desk, like this notebook I'm holding in my hand now, and flew across the room. I mean, that really, that would be enough for me.
Yeah.
Can we switch to UFOs now? Because this seems to be something a little bit different than your last series anyway. Why did you include a UFO story? I mean, I think Alan Godfrey, who's the character here, is quite a compelling man to listen to.
UFOs, I have been interested for a while. I mean, I was initially a little bit resistant to including anything apart from ghosts, because I felt like ghosts is such a deep seam to mine. But our commissioner at the BBC was very keen to include UFOs, and I was like, okay, all right, that's interesting. I'll look into it. And then, we started looking into the Todmorden case, and it's a great case. It's really interesting. And then when we put it out there, I was just really stunned by the response. It really connected with people in such a big way. And I think, the ghosts are definitely having a moment at the moment. I think there's a real fascination in the supernatural, for various reasons, probably because we're living through these chaotic, uncertain and death-filled times. We're kind of interested in what lies beyond. And I think there is also this real fascination with UFOs. The Pentagon report really put that debate back on the agenda again last year. And what's interesting is there are similarities and big differences between ghosts and UFOs. And I think, there are similarities in how people are treated. There's a whole sort of way we view witnesses. There's the kind of denigration of the witness, the kind of stigma attached to coming out and saying that this has happened to you. I'm intrigued by that. I mean, anything where people are being told they're crazy for saying things, I want to know, and yet they are compelled to keep saying it because they believe it so much. That interests me. I want to explore that more. But I mean, I think the big differences are that ghosts often come out of a kind of a domestic landscape, out of the mundane, often out of houses we live in. And they also often come out of a process as well. Like, it starts off with feelings of uneasiness and maybe sort of hearing noises, and and it builds. There's a kind of build to it, and it sort of charts a narrative. UFOs are almost always just a kind of boom, a moment of like, driving down a road and suddenly boom, it happens, and you see this thing, and it doesn't come from anywhere. And so I find that really intriguing. That feels like a clear difference, and there's something believable and shocking about the idea of just looking up into the sky and seeing this thing. And I think almost the fear factor of UFOs is greater. There's a really powerful fear about being invaded. And when you think about like how horrible and awful it must be to actually be in a situation where your country is being invaded. And then if you think about these invaders coming from the sky, I mean, it's the reason why things like War of the Worlds is such a powerful, enduring story. This idea that we as human beings are not the most powerful creatures in the world, that there's something that can come and subjugate us. And that, I mean, I was watching A Quiet Place the other day. I mean, bloody hell, that is terrifying. That if anyone hasn't seen that idea that, that humans are being hunted. I mean, like, it's powerful, isn't it? And UFOs kind of opens that gateway to those fears.
Let me ask you this then. What would you say is the more profound story in human existence? Would it be us learning that there are other species of some kind off Earth, or would it be that there is some kind of afterlife?
I think the afterlife, and I think that's why I have been more drawn to ghosts over the years. And I think ghost belief absolutely has its roots in our fear of death and our need as a society to process death. And I think, one of the reasons why we in Britain and America are particularly ghost obsessed is that we are very bad at dealing with death. We just don't do death very well. Like there are other cultures that are much better at processing death and sort of, staying in tune with ancestors, and just, death is something that they are able to kind of just deal with better than us. I think, we, and I would see myself as a case in point, are terrified of it. I have a real profound fear of death that I've had for years. And, at points in my life, it's been really, really acute. But, it's just, I hate the idea that human beings just stop, and that, all this kind of brilliant, amazing work of life just ceases. I kind of find that the most frightening thing I can think of. Dying is way more frightening than any ghost story. So yeah, I mean that's the thing that really gets me, I think. I mean, I think the idea that there is more to our universe is fascinating and powerful, and yes, there are fears attached to that idea of alien invaders coming, but it doesn't, for me, it doesn't get close to that real kind of evolutionary fear of death. When we are frightened of ghosts, we are frightened of the dark, what lies outside the campfire. It taps into those very deepest, darkest evolutionary fears of the hunters, our predators hunting us, could see in the dark and we couldn't, and the physical response to these things, to fear, is hardwired into us from those ancient moments, and you don't shed that fear easily.
Kind of related, if I may. Obviously, you said that you're scared of death. What else scares you, Danny? I don't get the sense that you'd be scared. I don't get the sense you'd be scared at sleeping at 6-1, or going up to the islands. Or so if you're not unnerved or unsettled, scared about going and sleeping in somewhere that you have described so eloquently in a podcast as being utterly terrifying, what does scare you then?
I'm scared of heights, but I think for me it all comes back to death, because I could fall from a height, I don't know. I mean, I'm scared by the experiences people tell me. I'm not scared by the idea of going and sleeping in Louisville myself. I'm scared by what happened to Phil there. I'm scared by the idea of that happening to me.
It wouldn't put you off going there.
No, I don't. No, it wouldn't. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, I guess it is interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we function in different ways, don't we? I mean, I feel, I mean, yes. I mean, if that happened to me at Louisville, I would be scared. Clearly, I'm not saying that. If poltergeist activity was happening around me, I would not be scared. I mean, very clearly, I would. But I think it comes back to that thing about it being this recipe or this cocktail, that you need these different ingredients. And I love that shiver down my spine when people tell me these stories, and I absolutely feel that fear that Ken felt or Phil felt or whatever. And I mean, I can lie in my own bedroom and scare myself imagining what's in the dark, but I guess it just keeps coming back to that thing I said about people, not places. I mean, I'm not scared by the idea of going and staying in the haunted inn or the haunted castle or whatever. That's not something that holds a horror for me. But I'm absolutely scared about being Ken or being Phil, being in that moment. Yeah.
For me, Alan Godfrey and Shirley Hitchings share something in common, which has to do with the media coverage and the real negative effects that had on their lives over time or at certain points. Do you have a sense of how they wish that would have been different?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think because they can't, that's how they've lived. They don't know a difference. So it's kind of hard to know. It's hard to unpick it. I mean, I think with Shirley, she went through quite a traumatic process when she was a teenager of the media interest, the quite prurient media interest in her. But at the same time, it was exciting for a teenager. There was undoubtedly a kind of adrenaline rush to being on the front pages of the newspapers. And you could argue that for a brief while, she sort of, did kind of get addicted to that kind of buzz of celebrity. She, any teenager would, And I think what's been really powerful is that as a woman in her 80s now, she's been able to reclaim the narrative. She's been able to tell the story in her own terms, and some of the things that were done to her, like the Daily Mail journalist who essentially kidnapped her, lied to her parents, lied to her mum that her dad had given permission, drove her off in his car, strip searched her, took her to a hypnotist to try and work out if she was lying, all those sort of things. I mean, that's horrific. I mean, the other day, just recently, the Weekend Mail, the same paper that did that to her, published this incredibly nice, respectful article about her and about her story, So, you could argue that is her kind of getting her own back in a way. I mean, certainly, I think that it's powerful that she's been able to tell the story her way now after all this time. But, her whole life has been colored by this, and she missed out on many things. She didn't get to go to art school. She did, it took her a long time to kind of meet a boyfriend, all these sort of things. She had a sort of whole chunk of her teenage years kind of corrupted, and kind of, she lost a chunk of time to this thing. I mean, Alan Godfrey lost so much. He found himself pushed into a very dark place, a place of alcoholism. He lost his career, his family. That's taken its toll. But at the same time, here he is, I think in his 70s, and he is somebody who is kind of somebody that people listen to. He's somebody that people respect. He's somebody that people go to as an expert on UFOs and telling his story. And again, you can see how, however awful and damaging the early stuff is, the kind of stimulus for this was, now that is a nice thing. That's an attractive thing. And you do want to perpetuate that. You want to perpetuate that thing of being the person that people are interested in. Yeah, I don't know. Hard, isn't it? I mean, it's not a clear-cut thing about this being a negative experience, and I think Shirley would say that as well. Like anyone who's been through these experiences, you have opened yourself up. You've been open to another dimension, and it's something that the rest of us have not been privy to. And I would describe myself as a skeptic who wants to believe, and so I kind of, a little bit of me thinks I wish I'd seen that, and I probably don't, because I think, a lot of these stories, when you actually hear them and hear just how terrifying it was and how the impact it had on people, I think probably it's be careful what you wish for. But there's definitely a little bit of me that kind of wants to be those people and wishes I'd seen that.
Yeah. Okay, so last of all then, across all the work that you've done with Haunted, with the Battersea Poltergeist, and now this first season of Uncanny, can you say, or are you allowed to say, if there is one particular case that you find the most unsettling above all others?
I asked people on social media this the other day about, which case sticks with you most. And it was really interesting seeing the different answers people gave. I think it says something a little bit about you and your personality, is what you kind of go for. There's people who are going to go for the UFO, people who go for the poltergeist. 6/11 clearly was the kind of breakout story of it, and for me that's been a kind of, as a storyteller, as somebody who enjoys telling stories, as a documentary maker, as a journalist, that's been a godsend. It's a story that keeps on giving, and like Battersea Poltergeist, it's a story that I feel very blessed to have received. But the one that really sticks with me from the series is episode 4, My Best Friend's Ghost, where it's about this girl Laura who loses her best friend to cancer, and then believes that she sees an apparition of her friend, and then later on has an experience with the medium where the medium appears to say the dying words of her friend to her. And it's, of all of the stories I was sent, it's the one that sticks in my mind most. I think it was actually sent to me originally when I made Haunted, and I didn't get to make a second series of Haunted for all sorts of boring contractual reasons, but when I made Uncanny, I was like, that is the story I really, really, really want to tell. And it stuck with me for those years in the interim. And it sent such a shiver down my spine. And it's one of the stories I personally find hardest to explain. If we accept, and in all these things, I go into a position of accepting that the person is telling me the truth, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm a bad judge of character and the person is lying, but if we accept that they are telling the truth, then I find that a really, 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 really hard story to explain. And it's just the specific nature of those words coming from that medium. And I'm not a fan of mediums at all. I mean, generally, I haven't met mediums in my own life who I've found compelling, really. But that one particular story just, sort of etches itself onto my mind.
Yeah, lump in the throat moment for sure.
Yeah,
and just
totally.
trying to get your head around how such a thing could have happened.
I think it's powerful, and I think the idea of grief. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say. I think the idea of grief is very, very powerful, and the idea of ghosts coming back to us. And actually, the stories that are scary pack a real punch, but the stories that are about grief and emotion and that need that sits in all of us to kind of see the ones we've loved again. I mean, that's they leave a lasting shadow, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Danny Robbins of Uncanny, thank you so much for coming back again to your latest terrific podcast. We really appreciate your time. We'll see you again.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you both.
So we were a little disappointed to see that when we chatted with Danny that his shed studio was not in use, but we do hope he's back in there soon, maybe when the season turns.
Indeed, yes. So Danny, well, thanks ever so much for joining us yet again, wherever you were when you were talking to us.
Right. So talking of hit podcasts on MetaPod, we're on a roll. Mm-hmm. It's like that's your turn to say like butter, Kevin. Anyway, missed it. We've got another show that's been featured on many of the best podcast lists so far this year. It's not focused on the supernatural, but it's equally unsettling, and that's called Sweet Bobby.
Yeah, next up, we've got our interview with Alexi Mostras, who we spoke to a few weeks back about the tale of a long and bizarre catfishing incident. Catfishing, for those that don't know, is, and I quote here, a deceptive activity where a person creates a fictional persona or fake identity on a social networking service, usually targeting a specific victim.
Yeah, and we're not going to say too much about it now because we don't want to spoil the podcast for those who haven't listened yet, but we highly recommend the story, so give it a listen over the next few weeks.
But then we thought we'd lighten things up a little bit after this run of, let's say, intensive podcasts with a great chat with Rob Harvilla of 60 Songs That Explain the 90s.
Lighten it up a little bit, if that's what you think about his favorite Dairy Queen Blizzard flavor.
That's very true.
Tune in for that, everyone.
Yeah.
Also coming soon is Heather Lee. She's host of a podcast that looks at a very curious social experiment during lockdown. That was virtual matchmaking without any identities and only voice to connect through. The show's called It's Nice to Hear You, and it's a terrific podcast that's worth your time.
Okay, so that's all from us for now.
Indeed it is. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
That's it for MetaPod this time. Thanks for listening. MetaPod will be back soon with another unpacking of the web's most interesting podcasts. But in the meantime, make sure to subscribe at any of the usual places you find your other favourite podcasts. We'd hate for you to miss upcoming episodes, and we'd love it if you left us a review. You can let us know what you think of this episode by going to metapodshow.com. We'll see you next time. MetaPod is produced by Wendy Morrill and Kevin May.